Remember the Forgotten.
Chapter 14. A Forgotten Town. It's time to move. Samuel stirred from his sleep as Sapphire's voice called to him, slowly opening up his eyes to the blinding sunlight to see her standing over him with her arms crossed. He yawned and slowly rolled over, groggily rising to his feet just as James had finished packing up his bedroll ahead. The three of them had been travelling through the woods for almost a week now, following Samuel's directions. Many times the other two had asked him, "Where exactly are we heading?" And each time he'd responded only, "Away." During the journey, the group had avoided roads, lighting fires, and most conversations as well, James and Sapphire spending day and night observing Samuel and his strange behaviours. Almost every hour as they walked, the boy would inexplicably stop, close his eyes, and slowly move his arms around him, as if searching for something invisible. Whenever either of them questioned it, he would act as if nothing happened and continue walking, eyes focused only on the ground ahead. Eventually, they simply stopped asking. Whenever the group paused to rest, for sleep or for a meal, Samuel would always spend his time either reading from or writing in his book, angled in such a way that Sapphire and James could never catch a glimpse. It wouldn't have mattered, but Samuel surely didn't know that. During a couple of nights where he had slept particularly soundly, James and Sapphire had stayed up late and pored through his book again. Its pages did contain more drawings, but none that helped them make any more sense of the boy. Almost all of them weren't human. Instead, a myriad of strange, nightmarish creatures, so odd and diverse that he certainly must have made them up. Strangely, though, they all had a common feature. Each one had only a single eye. The drawings that were of actual people were sparse, leaning towards the beginning of the book and not appearing particularly noteworthy. Certainly not anyone the pair recognised. After a few nights, they'd agreed that there was nothing more to gain from them looking through it, and resigned themselves to patience. On the 6th day, their long travels beginning to leave them weary, Sapphire, James, and Samuel trudged ever on through the vibrant, earthy woods. Under a chilly, overcast sky of overlapping grey and white clouds, it was a loudly expressed relief to James when he saw, finally, plumes of warm smoke cascading above the trees that rose in the distance, a sure sign of civilization. "Gods, yes," he muttered, clenching his fists and grinning. "A night in an inn sounds like the best thing in the world right now." "We can't risk staying anywhere," Sapphire reminded him promptly. "Those creatures will still be after us." James sighed and looked back at her almost pleadingly. "Then we can at least have a drink in the tavern, right? I can hear the warm fire calling to me." "Sure," said Sapphire, rolling her eyes. "Just don't make this the one occasion where you aren't desperate to leave." "We'd probably be fine to stay the night," began Samuel, practically the first time in days he'd uttered anything but a question. "The creatures won't be on our tail anymore." "Not a chance I'm willing to take," commanded Sapphire, then beginning to stride towards the smoke purposefully. "One drink, and then we're gone." As they plodded through the trees towards the enticing sight, the signs of civilization slowly began to reveal themselves. Scattered footprints turned to cart tracks along the darkened ground, and then eventually to quaint wooden houses resting between the trees. They began sparsely, but soon became denser and denser, enclosing the splatterings of dark grass and receding trees beside an unpaved but well-trodden path, along which the group continued to move surely onward. Most of the small homes ejected bright, flickering light from their curtained windows, making the quiet land feel slightly less empty despite the seemingly barren streets. As they strode onwards in mildly uncomfortable silence, the group finally stumbled upon somebody. A man, moving across their path, holding a walking stick in one hand and his forehead in the other. With a bad hunch and a bald head, he couldn't have been any less than 70 years old. James furrowed his brow, gesturing to the man as the group slowed to a halt. "Are you all right there?" he asked. The fellow turned to James, oddly, mirroring his confused expression. I think so. Without another word, the stranger blinked twice and continued along his way, paying no further mind to any of the three travellers. Guess he's going senile, James muttered, before making to continue his way along the path. As the buildings became more numerous, so too did they become more alike. The group quickly found themselves lost in a small but frustrating maze of wood and stone, only the sights of tall trees over the rooftops giving them a brief indication of where they were going. "Where the bloody hell is this tavern?" James moaned to nobody in particular. Sapphire rolled her eyes, just before settling her gaze on a new figure, a young woman walking down the street, and the first person they'd seen since the old man. She appeared confused, almost discombobulated. "Excuse me," Sapphire called out to her, waving a hand. "Do you happen to know where a tavern is?" The lady turned to Sapphire blankly. No. Like the man before, she seemed to have no further interest in the conversation, and went back to her wondering without another word. "All right," growled James, narrowing his eyes and looking around. "Something is definitely wrong with these people." Sapphire looked then to Samuel. His face was blank and stern as he continued to walk on, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Do you know what's going on here?" she asked him, brow furrowed in slight suspicion. "Huh?" replied Samuel, turning his head suddenly, yet showing no signs of surprise. No, I don't." Sapphire narrowed her eyes at him severely, observing his increasingly uncertain visage. "I suppose," he then murmured, looking down towards the floor, "we'd best go find out." As they strode further into town, small, empty storefronts and rising rooftops slowly but surely gave way to a large, open space of smooth dirt and cobbled streets, set between the pleasant faces of the surrounding cottages and larger, seemingly more public buildings. Multiple paths from elsewhere in the town met in the middle with a simple but pleasing pattern, all seeming to be centred around a gently crumbling cobblestone well that marked this as, most likely, the town square. Here, to the immediate and concerning notice of the three travellers, was gathered an exceedingly large crowd. The trio slowed to a stop at the edge of the square in gentle unease, Sapphire's eyes continually scanning the mass of bodies in confusion and discomfort. They appeared to be a varied bunch, as if the entire population of the town had been drawn out and mashed together in a ragtag crowd of fearful faces. Each of them, standing there, scared or confused and little else, held that same uncertain expression upon their face. James, tired and frustrated, impatiently stormed past his companions towards the dense cluster of townsfolk, putting his hands on his hips and shouting out loud enough for each of them to hear. "All right, enough is enough! What the hell is going on around here?" A few faces looked up. Most of the disarrayed gazes remained elsewhere. James huffed and rolled his eyes, pulling his hand across his face exhaustedly. "Excuse me?" he shouted again. "Anybody?" "Who are you?" a voice suddenly came from across the other side of the well. A young man, looking barely older than Samuel and dressed in grey work clothes with a dark cap, stood, arms close at his side, with a determined yet anxious expression upon his face. "I'm James," replied James, letting out a breath and calming his voice. "We're travellers from Machiavel. We were just looking for the tavern." "What's a Machiavel?" an older voice then called from amongst the crowd. "What's repeated James, letting out an incredulous sigh. "The village? Machiavel?" "Speaking of villages," began Sapphire, addressing the crowd herself, "can anyone tell us where exactly we are?" "I was hoping you could tell us," called the young man again, looking amongst the crowd gloomily. "We haven't much more of a clue than you." James's brow furrowed more than he knew it could, and he took a step back towards his companions. "Well, I was right," he whispered. "Something is definitely wrong with them." Out of nowhere, Samuel knelt down and began to withdraw his book from his bag, along with a quill and a hastily uncorked bottle of ink. Before Sapphire could even ask him what he was doing, he stood up and wordlessly strolled forward into the crowd, soon becoming immersed with a mass of grim faces and anxious chatter. Sapphire and James remained where they were, and merely exchanged glances, tired, but ever suspicious. "Excuse me," Samuel started, ducking between a few members of the crowd and slowing to a halt beside the young man who had spoken across the way. "Would you mind if I asked you some questions?" The fellow looked at him hesitantly, scratching the back of his head. "I suppose not." "Brilliant, thank you," smiled Samuel. "First of all, what's the last thing that you remember?" I remember I was carrying logs," answered the young man. I saw something in the woods, so I dropped them and ran. Next thing I knew, I was here, and I couldn't remember anything else." Samuel looked down at his open book and began scribbling, barely lifting his head as he continued. "And this thing you saw, what did it look like?" The young man stood still, his breath audibly shallow. Samuel continued writing as he awaited an answer. The young man finally replied, hesitantly. "It looked like a human at first, but it was crawling along the ground. It didn't seem to have any legs, just a long, slimy end, like a slug. It turned its head to look at me, and I saw..." Samuel interrupted the man during his pause, eagerness displaying through his voice. "What did you see?" "I saw one bright red eye looking back at me," finally finished the young man. I couldn't stay there any longer." "Thank you," said Samuel, his face caught in concentration as he finished scribbling. "That's very helpful." The young man nodded, and, getting no further reaction from Samuel, slowly shuffled away into the crowd. Finally looking up from his book, Samuel then held his quill near his shoulder and surveyed the crowd for another individual. To his surprise, somebody was, in fact, already surveying him. A small, high-pitched voice came from behind, and Samuel quickly turned to face its owner. "I saw something too, mister," called the small child before him, large eyes looking up in abrasive wonder. "Oh?" inquired Samuel, his voice softening even more than usual as he knelt down beside the boy. "Could you please describe it for me?" "It was a monster," the kid described, loudly. "I saw it leaving the town. It was all big and its arms was longer than its body. It walked into the forest, and then some people came outside and I couldn't see it anymore." Samuel nodded slowly as he continued writing it all down. "And what were you doing before you were getting water?" The boy looked up, opening his mouth for a split second as if about to speak, before a puzzled expression swept over his face. "I don't know, mister." "That's okay," Samuel told him, forcing a slight smile. "Thank you very much." After nodding in reply, the boy's attention seemed to be stolen elsewhere, as he then ambled off into the crowd without another word. With that, Samuel slowly began to detach from the mass of people, some of their eyes still following him curiously, and worked his way over to a quiet bench that sat beneath the windowsill of a house at the edge of the square. 2 flower pots hung from high, curling metal poles either side of him as he took a seat, flipped to a new page, and began drawing. From their spots, James and Sapphire were watching the boy still, confusion and annoyance rising with every action he took. "What the hell is he doing?" asked James. "No fucking clue," replied Sapphire. She put her hand to her hip and began to slowly withdraw her blade as she spoke, urging James to hush his voice with a gesture. He followed his brow in aggravated surprise as he watched her. "What the hell are you doing?" "Something is clearly amiss," she whispered harshly. "I refuse to be caught with my guard down." "Then help me figure out what's going on," James growled back. "Making enemies isn't going to help us." Sapphire turned to him, her face as quizzical as could be underneath her scowl. "That's rich coming from you." "Right, and now's the time to bring this up, is it?" glared James, gesturing wildly with his hands. Sapphire sighed, reluctantly dropped her sword back into its scabbard and proceeded to stomp suddenly and impatiently forward towards Samuel. just as the boy stood up from his bench and began to re-engage with the crowd. "Excuse me," he asked a haggard-looking woman in a long black dress. "Do you by any chance remember seeing anything? Perhaps in the woods?" I don't think so, no," the woman replied. Samuel nodded respectfully and wormed his head in front of another, older-looking gentleman with intense eyes. "Excuse me, do you perhaps remember anything?" "I don't remember the last day at all," replied the man in a raspy voice, expression distant. "But I do think I saw this creature that people have been whispering about. It looked almost like a cloud, but it wasn't far off the ground at all. It's hard to describe what I saw. It was like nothing I've ever seen. And it had a semblance of a face almost carved into it, like. It had a very striking eye. Just one, though. The other was missing. But the eye it had, though, it was red and sparkly, like a gem." Samuel scribbled enthusiastically in his book as he rushed to transpose the abundant detail he had been given, eyes both frantic and focused. "Thank you very much," he told the man. "This is most helpful." The man, in response, nodded and coughed a scratchy wheeze as he went to take a seat nearby. Samuel subconsciously had his eyes open wider than usual as he penned in the final words and raised his head to continue his interviews. "Excuse me, you didn't happen to see—" He was quickly cut off as he felt a familiar grip attach itself to his shoulder. Turning around sheepishly, Samuel faced Sapphire's intense gaze. "What the hell is going on here?" she growled at him, cutting immediately to the chase. Samuel stuttered. I'm as confused as you are." "The fuck you are," Sapphire rebuked. "You clearly know a hell of a lot more than you've told us, and you seem to be learning more by the second." I'm just trying to find out what happened," insisted Samuel. "The villagers don't remember anything at all." "Enough of the bullshit," interjected James, shoving his way through the resistant crowd towards them both. "What are these creatures the villagers saw? Are they like the ones that are after us?" Samuel shook his head. "No, The eye," Sapphire murmured softly, a realization dawning on her face. "Then what the hell are these things?" continued James, oblivious to Sapphire's epiphany. "Why are they—" "The eye," repeated Sapphire, louder. James turned to her confusedly. "What?" She stared back at him wide-eyed, still frustrated. "Red and sparkly? Like a gem?" James's jaw loosened as he stared blankly at her for a moment. Oh. "So we'll ask again," growled Sapphire to Samuel as she turned back to face him. "What the hell are these creatures?" Samuel shifted about anxiously, failing to meet her gaze. Both James and Sapphire's eyes seemed to dig into his soul like a sword at his throat, and despite himself, he could feel his will draining by the second. With a heavy intake of air, he resignedly snapped his book shut and aimed his gaze toward the ground. "Not creatures," he finally admitted, flexing his fingers nervously. "Just a creature." James's incredulous stare locked onto Samuel's evasive face as he spoke. "You heard the people," he scoffed. "There were lots of different creatures." "They remember lots of different creatures," corrected Samuel. "But there was only ever the one." The boy's stare bored into the ground, his fingers then finally ceasing their fidgeting as he released the tension in his face and sighed deeply. He had finally surrendered. "It's called The Forgotten."